Hello, Dan. Hello, Joachim. We meet today to discuss the contents of an article that has recently appeared on the Vogelin site, Vogelin View site. The title of the article was Philosophy and the Beyond. And I've had a few people asking me questions about it, and perhaps you can formulate your own, and we can see if we can clarify arguments, moments of the article for the benefit of humanity as a whole. So, Dan, would you like to shoot to begin with?
Sure. Yeah, I was, so the thing that I honed in on, I thought was interesting, and
Yeah.
I don't follow, is the relationship of the problem of Socrates. And you wrote, when conceiving is settling the problem of Socrates, even the saintly life illuminated by extraordinary religious promises and expectations merely contributes to discrediting Socratism, if only unwittingly, by exposing it to an alien condition of justification, as if the Socratic life were invalidated by the fall into disrepute of its Christian proof.
Yes.
Yeah, and I don't follow. You quote extensively from Strauss's lecture, The Problem of Socrates.
Yeah.
And my question is, how do you understand the problem of Socrates?
Okay. Well, the passage you cited, yes, to begin with, yes, if that was not clear. Well, you have what I'm suggesting there is that Christianity is defending the principles of Socratism. Socratism, as we know, stood for a justice that transcended the dictates of his society, of any society, yeah? And certainly that transcended the feelings of rebels to that society, okay? So we could say that those feelings were represented, expressed even by Euthyphro, by sophists in general, who saw that the justice, the positive right, yeah, the justice incarnated by the society had serious shortcomings. Yeah? So they saw that there was a reality, a truth beyond it. Now that truth for them was incommensurate with the lessons of your fathers. So we have, these Aristophanes plays where you have this young Socrates who is looking at the clouds and who forgets, in fact, looks down upon even, as all the sophists, disparages too, if only secretly, the morality of the city, the morality of his fathers. So we have Socrates, the Socrates defended by Christianity is a Socrates who recognizes that there's a justice clearly that transcends might. Yeah.
So the Socratism that is defended by Christianity.
Yes. Yes.
But it's not defended against. It can't be defended against modernity.
Barbarism, against incivility.
But you mentioned modernity especially, and you're saying that the relation is that both view something as higher than the political. There's something that transcends the political. Both Christianity and philosophy, Socratism and Christianity.
Yes, but it's not enough to say
they share a transcendence. But the question is going to be about that which transcends, isn't it? I mean, that there's a difference there. Do you recognize that?
Yes, but again, the crucial difference also is here is that it's not philosophy as such, because a philosopher,
What's not philosophy as such for Christianity?
as such, could be pre-Socratic philosophy. So we have people who seek truth independently of, you could say, of morality, or without any concern for the good as such. If you look at Parmenides is almost, it comes closer to Socrates. But if you look at Heraclitus and others, we have a cosmic vision, yeah. But that cosmic vision is really incommensurate with the ordinary life of men.
So, but what I'm asking, so then does the pre-Socratic, does the Heraclitus, does he live the philosophic life?
Yes, but it's not a Socratic life. And that Heraclitus is not what Christianity is defending, and not only defending, but it,
no,
right.
Not at all.
Right.
I agree.
So
but for Socrates, he has more in common with Heraclitus than Christianity, no?
Socrates has more in common with Heraclitus than with Christianity, you're asking?
Yes.
In some respect, yes. In the respect that that we understand Christianity as a kind of, but in this sense, yeah. But we don't need to, and it is not clear, in fact, that this is what Christianity is doing, namely proving once and for all that the Socratic intuition and pertaining to a justice that transcends any might, be it that of the cosmos or that of the king, is correct. If we understand Christianity as a vindication, not a proof, but a vindication, we could say also a defense, an open defense, an authoritative defense, if you like, of the Socratic lesson.
Does the Socratic lesson, so does it require that defense? That is the Socratic defense different from the Christian defense?
Is the Socratic defense differing from?
Doesn't it supply its own defense?
Yes, but Socrates, it was not all that successful, was it? I mean, in practical terms, huh?
It was enormously successful, wasn't it?
In practical terms, Aristotle already had to leave, had to run away. And philosophers have always been in trouble throughout the centuries, vis-a-vis anti-philosophical animosity. The Roman Empire had, look at what they did to Cicero and to others. All the poets had to speak between the lines to survive in that environment.
That's a good thing. But that's Seneca. A good thing. Philosophy stays itself by being, the difference between writing exoterically and what they're having different messages for different people is a good thing for philosophy. So, but do you disagree with Strauss then when he says that that he sometimes wonders if Plato wasn't too successful?
That is a different story. That is a different story.
But I think he's talking about exactly the success in establishing philosophy as something that lives in the city.
I would say that when Plato is too successful, that means hello, Chris. We haven't.
All right, sorry about that.
Yet.
It's like a party in there. Yeah, music. This trying to catch up the speed here.
When Plato is too successful, that is, I would say, I would argue that it's Christianity that is ill understood. Okay, so when we don't understand Christianity for what it really is,
so you think
then we have
Let me see if I follow you just before you go on. So you're saying that Strauss is suggesting that Plato is too successful through Christianity, through his impact
with
on
Christianity, but not only with Christianity, but especially with Christianity. Absolutely. Medieval Christianity. Consider, for instance, Al-Farabi's, and this he quotes, in one of his books, Strauss, that Al-Farabi sees Plato's laws as essentially as inviting prophecy, and they're intimating you could say a theocracy that you have in the Middle Ages. So, Christianity saw Socrates as intimating, and not only Socrates, but Virgil and others, of course. The early Christians considered them as early prophets of Christianity, as intimating the coming of a new era, which was, of course, the Christian era, understood as a Christian era, and that would consummate the intuitions of paganism. Now, this is
doesn't Strauss say that they do that, and in doing that, they get Plato wrong?
Well, this is where Plato is too successful. He asks, could it not be that, Platonism might have been even too successful?
Well, he was successful, as you mentioned, with in Islam and in Judaism as well.
Yes,
but the success there is less harmful to philosophy than its success in Christianity. No, philosophy itself.
No, I wouldn't say. I mean, not necessarily.
He says in Persecution and the Art of Writing that by guaranteeing its private character,
yes,
that philosophy in a way was better off under Islam and Judaism than it was under Christianity.
In a way,
by being established,
yes,
officially recognized, that was detrimental to philosophy and the philosophic life. It wasn't established in Islam or Judaism.
Yes,
and yet it thrived and was better understood as a result. Isn't that a suggestion?
Better understood not by regular Muslims,
by the philosopher.
Yeah, but it's because they were still facing dangers that
That's dangerous.
Yes, yeah, but it was no longer dangerous in medieval Christianity, you would say. That is not entirely correct. That in some sense, this is on the surface, this is correct. There's no question about it. But in reality, we know that in medieval Christianity, you certainly did have strong currents of skepticism. And that skepticism was, thriving in medieval Christianity. And we see it finally, perhaps in its most glorious form in Dante Alighieri. But we have it throughout. We have the various traditions. He refers back to the troubadours. So we have a whole tradition there of les fous du roi.
So what is it that the skeptics are skeptical of?
Jongleur. What are they skeptical? Oh, about this coincidencia, this coming together and beyond doubt of justice and positive right. Justice as such. So the ultimate truth being incarnated in the institution.
And is that a teaching of the church? Is that so they're skeptical of the church's belief that the two come together or should come together, or no?
That I don't think that is a teaching of the church.
But the teaching of the rabbis.
What?
But kind of the teaching of the rabbis already, isn't it?
this is no. I mean, there is, there is. I mean, there. Let me put it this way. They were still waiting for the Messiah. So it cannot be that the present establishment is incarnating the answer to all of our troubles. It cannot be.
No, it's more that it should always be happening.
They're still debating. They're still debating. So
but then in a sense, it's always kind of happening, is it?
What?
In a sense, then it's always kind of happening.
What is
not
it?
That this coincidence.
It's always falling short. It's always falling short of incarnating.
Yeah.
So it is. Again, they're still waiting for the Messiah. So no, not yet. They the people and the rabbis are there as mementi, as reminders of the fallenness of man. They're reminders of the fact that the current establishment it falls short, necessarily so, of the promised land.
So what about the post-Christ rabbis? What about like a Maimonides? What is it that Christ adds to his reflection that would have been missing without Christ? Because I think when I latch onto the notion of skeptics within Christianity, and I think you're right, that Marsilius would be a good example as well. But the question is the skepticism a Christian element, or is that a philosophic element? I'm still not convinced that the two come together, the philosophic and the Christian, that the transcendence, that what transcends the political is the same in each case.
The skeptical element is by definition philosophical. Now, the question about Christianity is whether
there are limits to the skepticism in Christianity. Do you agree or no?
I am, but there's always been limits. The question is how you articulate that skepticism, blatantly, in a modern way, or in very subtle manners.
So you think the Christians are more subtle, the Christian thinkers who adapt themselves to philosophy are more subtle than a Maimonides?
No, wait, why do you say the Christian thinkers who adapt themselves to philosophy? The philosophers who adapt themselves to Christian establishments. Okay, so they're obviously very subtle, and we have undercurrents.
More subtle than Maimonides.
Not necessarily, but I mean, he's
pretty subtle.
He's pretty subtle. I mean, it's hard to beat, but he's pretty subtle. You're confronted with distinct forms of establishment of institutions, so you work with them. But as philosophers,
that makes sense.
They could go two ways. There's always been the nominalist in the medieval Christianity, nominalist current, which eventually, went through Marsilius and others, and developed into the Latin Averroism, and finally into early modernity, and it's picked up by Machiavelli and then Descartes and others, and it really lashes out against Christianity finally, and then, or rather, uses Christianity against its Platonic impulse. And then you also had a moderate form of skepticism, which was the Platonic skepticism, or Socratic, if you like, that was again at work in Christianity to moderate it, to maintain it open to genuine transcendence. And because of that, Christianity, to the extent that medieval Christianity flourished and gave us great things, I think it was Platonic in impulse. So we have these two philosophical currents at work in the Middle Ages. It turns out that in practical terms, the antinomial impulse, the materialist impulse, was able to gain the upper hand, and we see this with the rise of modernity out of the Middle Ages.
So yeah, there was the possibility that positive right might coincide with something else.
Explain, please.
Per the new signs that positive right, that laws could be conformed to, not to a transcendent law, but a sort of a concrete, factual, measurable reality that could promise freedom and power.
Well, positive law is the ultimate court of appeal where there's no providence. And, you know, if the underpinning is material, then
well, then 2021.
Yeah.
I mean, we're constantly wrestling with numbers, I think is the Dutch phrase. We're constantly wrestling with numbers. We're doing our best.
Le Petit Prince, hein? The Little Prince. You know, this Saint-Exupéry, who is not you know, with all of his shortcomings, neo-romantic shortcomings. Nevertheless, he is, of course, mocking these adults who define adulthood in terms of the capacity to quantify everything, to measure and determine everything.
What's wrong with that? They got more neurons.
Big brains.
Yeah.
I'm still interested in the pre-modern phenomenon, though, because I think this is where the rubber hits the road. And you say, Marco, that philosophy accommodates itself to Christianity, and I think that's right. I think where you find it in Christianity, that's what happens. But the reason I bring up Maimonides and Al-Farabi is that it can accommodate itself to a variety of different beliefs, religions, laws for the people. And the element that is the same is philosophy. It's not Christianity. I'm not sure what Christianity brings to the table other than philosophy has to accommodate itself.
There is clearly a big distinction between Christianity and Islam, or, you know, well, Islam, you know, let's say Judaism. Judaism as the institution, let's say, does not presuppose philosophy or the language of philosophy. Christianity does. The Gospels are an integration, constitute an integration of the Hebrew Bible's language and Platonic, or the language of the philosophers. If you read St. Paul, and St. Paul wrote his letters before the Gospels were composed. The language of St. Paul with nature and so forth, the references to nature, is obviously affected by the discourse of the philosophers, which he recovers, he integrates and brings into harmony with the Hebrew Bible.
Is Paul a philosopher?
What is a philosopher?
I think a philosopher is someone who's doing exactly the things that we're talking about, who is going to weigh and come to a decision on these matters by himself, individually.
Well, individually.
Yeah.
I am starting to itch.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, the thing about Socrates is he was always in the market. He was in the agora talking to everybody, to, you know, not there's a kind of virtue of humility there, which aligns with a more Christian notion of humility, in a philosophical sense, though, that he talks with one and all. So
yeah, he dines with sinners.
Contra being individual, it's really an engagement with the collective that leads to Platonic understanding.
Does he accept their views?
he interrogates their views Socratically, right?
As they do? Are they interrogators?
Well, it depends on who he's talking
Questions.
to. Right.
Let's just steer away from this term interrogator.
Not interrogate, but he questions. Yes, he investigates. I mean, it seems to me that philosophy provides the ground out of which to make sense of Christianity, and Christianity, because it shoots so high into the very heavens, loses some sense of its roots, of its groundedness in the philosophical life. So, Marco, you had said that Christianity vindicates Socrates, and so it follows then that in some sense Socrates unvindicates Christianity. That's a very vague way to put it, but that what is lost by Christianity vindicating Socrates is a certain return to a more grounded state out of which philosophical as well as Christian virtue can be properly pursued.
The risk is taking things for granted, I would say, for the philosophical mind.
Well, especially when one gets into the Protestant Reformation, there's a loss of the past. There's a severing of the root, and what is Judaism if not reverence for the root, albeit a root which is less in touch in some sense with the Socratic life, insofar as it neglects the Christian vindication of the Socratic life. And so we have, on the one hand, philosophy, which is it's just taking first principles from direct experience, from conversation, from being in any given country, be it Greece, be it wherever, simply by conversation and interlocution. And then Christianity, which arrives as this deus ex machina, which brings us to contemplate the highest heavens, and thereby loses, by bird's eye view, the granularity of the philosophical investigation. And then Judaism, which finds its place in a different, separate from Socrates, form of groundedness. So the task in returning, it seems to me, from a position perhaps of Christianity to Socrates is to find the way to find a common ground for all of these things, to move upward in a grounded way, so as not to overextend the root.
Do you think that philosophy doesn't look up until Christianity? Do you think that
no, I think philosophy does look up, but it has a natural limit. You know, trees, for instance, can only grow so high. Buildings can only be built so tall. Thinking of Tower of Babel or whatever else. There are physical natural laws which prevent human beings from ascending like Superman up to the right hand of the Father. So Christianity, by presenting these miracles in the life of the resurrection, the ascension, the healing of lepers, the healing of the blind and the lame and the dumb, these things, on the one hand, encourage a discouraged humanity in a Jewish context that had been beat down by the Romans, but on the other hand, can lead to a kind of hubris, insofar as we take too much for granted that God will supervene and not rather seek to strengthen us in the very root. Because, what does Christ say? That the Jews seek signs and Greeks seek reasons, but the only, that Christ is a stumbling block for both, because he only, the way Jesus performs miracles is very strange, and so there's always a didactic purpose behind every miracle in the gospel. I'm not really.
So it's through Christianity that the natural limits are first experienced as transcendable.
Yes, but at the same time, through Christianity, one sees God himself imposing the limits he placed on the rest of humanity upon himself by taking on the form of a man.
How is that seen?
How is what seen that well that God became man, that God Beth the Christmas story, born in a manger, as a little babe, as a defenseless infant with no room in the inn.
So the story is what shows that to us, that this was.
Yeah, well, I think that Socrates or any of the ancients would have been shocked to consider God taking on the form of an infant, in Roman or Greek society. A child was his father's property to do with what he was. So for the idea of God becoming it's very commonplace now for us with Christmas decorations and
Why do
Rudolph
you
the
say
Red-Nosed
that,
Reindeer.
Chris? Why do you say that the God who becomes a child in this and saves the world is not is unheard of among the pagans? I mean, we don't have to limit ourselves.
I'm not saying it's unheard of.
Don't we see this in Virgil? Don't we see this even in the Egyptians? See this all over. You see it even in ancient China, for that matter. It's not as well known among us.
I suppose, and yet
how it's understood and how it's interpreted.
But it brings it into much sharper relief, in that it's told in this story of prophecy being fulfilled, and ultimately the God-man Christ taking on the sins of the world. In pagan mythology, I don't think you ever get a narrative quite so acute. I mean, the Christian story is not necessarily unique in its overall shape. One can point to other stories of God, intervening through humble means, but it is unique insofar as the historical person of Christ.
Historical person.
Well, that Christ as a man, with stories to be told throughout the Gospels about this man. One doesn't get a story ever of a real human being, maybe in myth, but Socrates, where was he born? He was born into a position of aristocracy in ancient Athens. There were slaves at that time, and Socrates was not a slave. He was part of a privileged elite.
But he was pretty poor himself, wasn't he?
Privilege. And what privilege is the story? So how do we evaluate?
Well, the entire Athenian cast of people who had
the story of Christ. What privilege is that story?
The story of Christ is privileged insofar as Christ himself is not privileged. I mean, archaeologically, the manger where he was born was a cave.
What power does it have over us today? How does it impact us today? Why would this story have an influence on our views?
Why would why should we be? Excuse me. Why should we hold it as privileged? How should it be privileged above the others?
I think it's privileged insofar as it vindicates the others. The others similar. There have been similar stories throughout time, and the Christian story brings those. When Christ dies on the cross, the fabric is rent, and people raise from the dead, like people arise from their tombs, being a kind of typology of all of the forgotten people who
that's still part of the story
prior to Christ, but
it's still part of the story.
Well, yes, it is.
You have to privilege the story before any of that can be accepted.
And the story is privileged by the fact that there were witnesses to miracles.
The witnesses are part of the story.
The witnesses are part of the story, that it is said that there were 500 people gathered when he ascended into heaven, and on, and that these stories afterwards written down. I mean, it's a question of faith.
Yes.
The virtue of faith, and faith cannot be arrived at by mere reason. And so philosophy cannot of its own accord lead to Christian faith.
Yeah, okay, but what is reason, mere reason? And then again, is it what is telling you the story about reason and not being able to reach the heights of faith? Or what is reason? Is it logos? I mean, there is a kind of yeah. And yet the logos is incarnated, yeah, as the Christ. Yeah.
Well, Christ is a self-emptying, he took on the form of a slave, it is said.
Okay, but this whole discourse is, discourse, this is a whole discourse that can be rendered, the word discourse can be rendered as logos, which can be rendered as reason. So, oratio is prayer in Latin. Oratio.
Okay.
Ratio is reason. It's reason that sings. Okay, that is what a prayer is in Latin, etymologically. So, I mean, we take a lot for granted when we speak this way.
Sure. Well, that's part of the problem. I mean, I'm speaking in this vein because I was raised Christian and I believe, but you're right. I mean,
you're not raised as a medieval Christian.
But well, no. But you could say by what right? Why should someone find any of what I have to say about these miracles convicting at all? If it's simply a kind of magic show or something. But I don't know.
The question would be, but the question would be, does it require something outside of the logos, like a miracle, to prove? I mean, is there something about stories and storytelling that has an evidence or an ability to move people that's in the story?
I think that Christianity would have failed to spread across the world had it not been for evidence, direct perception, and witness of miracles. I think that Christ performs miracles in a philosophical way, in a didactic fashion in the Gospels, that he doesn't simply perform miracles to earn points or something, but that the feeding of the 5,000 is a typology of the Eucharist. That when he heals the blind man or whatever it is, he tells him not to tell anyone, because in that case there was no didactic purpose to it. He was just showing mercy on someone, and so I think we misconstrue Christ insofar as we revel in the miraculous simply as soothing balm upon the woefulness of life, and fail to see that Christ is performing these miracles in a philosophical way. And
not only is Christ performing the miracles in a philosophical way, but you could argue that the authors of the story are telling you about Christ performing these miracles thus, because for a didactic purpose. Is that what?
Right. Well, I mean, it says at the very end of the Gospels, after Christ is risen and again talks to the apostles, says there's so many things said that not all the books written in the world could ever contain them. And so, Christianity loses sight of its own groundedness in something more like Socratism, insofar as we like children, like infants, look to Christ merely as Savior and not as teacher. That he is both, and so to reapproach Christianity with a view to Socrates, to humble the Christian tendency to vault itself and to show itself off as supreme answer, and so someone like Plato has great value for the Christian to read, because it prunes the tree, that it brings us back to the source. And
does Plato have value to non-Christians?
Certainly. I mean, Plato
So what's the difference between the value?
I mean, the story of
Plato...
Socrates is a fully natural story. There's no supernatural elements directly.
So the miracle as miracle is important.
In the Jewish context, in the Christian context, yes. I mean, the whole story of the Bible from the Old Testament from the get-go is based in supernatural telling. I mean, you read the book of Genesis, you see the parting of the Red Sea, the turning of rods into
there's miracles there too. Yeah,
exactly. I mean, in the Jewish mind there is a borderline kind of obsession sometimes on the miraculous. Which Christ rebuffs in the gospel by saying that the only sign that this generation is a corrupt generation because it seeks a miraculous sign, and the only sign given to it will be the sign of Jonah, that is the 3 days in the tomb as the whale.
There's a certain lack of humility that attends to that, I think, is what you're suggesting.
Certainly, yes, because one.
Let me ask you. So why not just Plato? If Plato avoids the miracle altogether,
does he avoid the miracle?
Yes, he does.
Well, yes, he has no access. He has no access to the miracle.
Hold on. There are no spectacular miracles. Mirabilia, mirabilia. What is a miracle? In Latin, it's a okay.
But what I'd like to know is
marvel.
I'd like to know what Chris's definition is, because I think Chris is talking about something that Christianity brings. He says it's rooted in the Jewish tradition, and I think that's correct. I think that it grows out of that.
But not only, it doesn't just grow out.
It doesn't just grow out of it, but the recourse to miracles are in the Bible, Old
clearly.
Testament.
To say that Plato is shut to miracles, I think is a mistake.
But what I'm suggesting is that Chris is right, because Chris suggested that I asked what is the problem with just Plato? What is it that we miss if we allow Plato to do this and
to run the country?
To suggest that
I don't think there's anything wrong with Plato. It's just
but there's a limit, and that limit is nature. That there are limits supplied by nature which are transcended in Christianity. If I understood you correctly.
Well, right. I mean,
no, Dan. The limit is 2 terms. That's the limit.
People. How does a man raise from the dead after 3 days or 4 days in the case of Lazarus? I mean, how does a cripple...
What does that mean?
Well, the case of the cripple being healed...
I got a more interesting question.
Has a clear didactic purpose, right? Like that's a great case in point of Christ using a miracle philosophically. When he's why are people besieging him? Why is he so popular? Because he's performing it, because he's healing people. He gets a reputation as a healer. That's why people are interested in Christ in the very first place. So he's being swarmed by people, and then a paralytic is dropped through the ceiling because there's no other way to get in, and he says, "Your sins are forgiven." And they say,
"You're telling us the story, Chris. Excuse me. You're recounting these." But of course,
well, I'm recounting it for a purpose. I'm recounting it for a purpose because he says, "Your sins are forgiven," and they say, "Who is this man to forgive sins?" And he says, "What is it? Is it easier to say your sins are forgiven, or to say, get up and walk? But so that you may know that the Son of Man can forgive sins, get up and walk." And then he gets up and he walks, and that miracle is serving a philosophic, didactic purpose in showing something about the forgiveness of sins. Right, and so he doesn't
human agency. Could you say that it's not only or in fact, ultimately, it is not God directly who will save you, but it is God through man who will save you.
Well, yeah, I mean, what is Christ as the one of the 3 persons of the Trinity, but God with us, Emmanuel, right? So we encounter Christ, you could say, in human beings, and to engage in the Christian life, like engaging in the philosophic Socratic life, involves an engagement with other people. That you cannot be a Christian in isolation. It is when 2 or 3 are gathered that the Spirit is in the midst, and so you cannot have a Platonic dialogue without a Socratic interlocutor. So philosophy, like religion, is something that is collective. You cannot be a Christian in isolation. I always like to say that Christianity ought to be a verb. that you behave Christianly insofar as you imitate Christ in your actions to others. And you are not a Christian ontologically in your own being. What being does man have? We have no being apart from divine transcendence. We are made of shatterable glass that merely reflects and transmutes the light of divine will.
Is the divine to be understood primarily in terms of a will?
Well, not will. Yeah, I hesitated because I was about to say providence of the divine, whatever the divine may involve, and the divine often involves the demonstration and of phenomena that does counter our will. Sometimes it supports our will. It just depends.
Whose will?
Human will. That
are you going to draw a distinction between good people and bad people? Or let me be more precise. Are you going to distinguish between the will of a poet and the will of an unpoetic man?
Are you going to spoil my fun, is what he's asking?
Well, yeah. Well, I mean, what is the life of holiness other than some kind of subversion of human will, that I desire various ends, and maybe God allows me to pursue them, and maybe he doesn't. And it's if the person who resorts, for example, to sorcery or to the occult, to these kinds of ways of getting one's way. One thinks of, Aleister Crowley or various people like this who engage in a kind of black magic to get their will. Such things work. There's a kind of mind control that takes place in the Church of Scientology or various forms like that. And so
that's not magic.
Well,
psychology, right?
L. Ron Hubbard was involved in magic, and he was personally acquainted with Aleister Crowley, I don't quite know what magic.
The thing, I want to pull it back. I still want to try and focus just as much as we can on the difference between Plato and Christianity. And you brought up that the miracles are more than just miracles because they're pedagogical. They're used to teach. Yeah. And the story that you told, the miracle is used to show that sin is forgiven. Is sin a Platonic concept? Does Plato acknowledge that man is sinful?
That's a good question. I mean, sin means missing the mark is what it's derived from. That to miss is to sin, and so
sin is not a moral thing. It's not evil. It's not that man's intention.
I think that Christians.
What do you mean by sin? What etymologically?
Yeah. So I think the word sin is sort of has been so used and overused that we tend to lose a sense of that it can. I think sin ought to be perhaps understood more platonically than it often is.
There's no Platonic sin. Sin is not Platonic.
Wait, Dan. However, wait, Dan. What do we call sin in medieval Christianity? Culpa, yes? Culpa can otherwise be rendered as fault. Yeah?
Error.
Yeah. Now, if you look at Adam, I mean, we have, there is a tendency today in the modern world to speak of sin with a very strong, I don't know, Lutheran tinge to it, or even modern. I don't know, modern. I mean, everything. All terms have a modern stain to it today.
It gets reified. The concept of sin gets reified. So when you think of sin, you think.
But I think it's very modern to suggest that sin is error. That sin is
no. It is very modern to suggest that it is error in a modern sense. But if you look at it's not just a mistake of reason. Okay, because that would be, or reason understood again in modern terms. What I'm suggesting is all terms of our discourse have a strong modernist stain to them in ordinary parlance.
I agree, but Chris used the term sin and suggested that
culpa.
No, he said sin.
Yes, but it's culpa in Latin, and we cannot speak about sin without going back to this original sense of Christianity.
Chris knows what he meant by sin, because he used it to suggest that it's something that's was used by Christ.
And we don't find it in Plato.
And we don't find it in Plato. No, we don't find it in
and
Plato.
And what I am arguing is that for medieval Christianity, sin, what we call sin, is culpa. Sin is a translation. Now, the translation is stained. And what I'm suggesting is that culpa is also primarily a legal term. Culpa is the guilty one. You're guilty, and you're guilty under the law.
What's the so guilty under the law is what you would, how you would translate sin?
There is look at Adam. What does the poor guy do? Is he sinful in modern terms, psychological terms, in terms of his intention? No. Poor Adam is like one of these guys who doesn't know the law, who has forgotten the law, who is confused by the woman in that case, who is the and there's a whole tradition of interpretation of Hebrew interpretation. So we have the Talmud that where you have these discussions about where is the fault, but it is, and it's very legalistic if you like, but it is definitely tied to the notion of law. Now, morality without law is a modern conception. Morality that is abstracted from law, so the separation of morality and law is a modern.
Are human beings culpable for their error?
Well, one way to approach the concept of sin,
the consequences.
In the Jewish context, there was a Mosaic law, which was unique legally because it was both a legal law and it was a moral law. It was both in one. That's a somewhat unique thing that Judaism created. And so sin, the Christian notion of sin, I think grew out of the Jewish notion of sin and error in a legal context, which was also a moral context.
The thing that I'm still trying to figure out, because I think that you're onto something, Chris, when you suggest that the notion of sin is something that differentiates. I'm trying to figure out what the difference is between Christianity.
I think I might have just said it. I think I might have just said it, in that if the ground for Christian sin is Jewish law, and Jewish law, Mosaic law, is both moral and legal, then error, sin, culpa, whatever you want to call it, is a truncation, is some kind of way of going against a law which is both moral and legal.
A just law.
Yeah.
But how is that different from Plato?
I think it's different from Plato insofar as, the final trial of Socrates. Socrates he does not flee. He elects to die by drinking the hemlock, and so he's up against a legal system which is formulating unjust laws, whereas but legally speaking, under that unjust system, in the contours of the Athenian legal system, the execution of Socrates is just. It is legally just. It's not really just, but it's legally just. Whereas when you look at the crucifixion of Christ, it was actually illegal to crucify Christ under the Jewish legal system. That the rabbis, who were in charge of scapegoating Christ, who gave the 30 pieces of silver to Judas, that they were not just violating moral law, but they were actually violating their own legal law.
Is sin simply intrahuman? That is, sin is something that only exists between human beings?
No, in the face of the law. And the law there is just and divine.
So it's beyond human beings.
I think in the Jewish context, if someone was born a paralytic, then it was assumed that there was some kind of sins, that, in other words, his parents or his grandparents had not abided by the law, which was both legal and moral, and thus he deserved to be born a paralytic, and so no mercy should be shown to him. And so when Christ is saying
what
that
about
sins are forgiven,
Job? What about Job?
Yeah.
I mean, there's
Or take
always
the story of Job precedes the Mosaic law.
Take a simpler example. Take Mosaic law. Is it a sin to take the Lord's name in vain?
Yeah.
Okay. And that's just because it's a law.
Well, yeah, it's in the Decalogue, on the tablets Moses brought from Mount Sinai.
So it's a sin against God, or it's a sin against human law?
It's all of one tapestry. You could say that you look at something. I mean, if you go through the Ten Commandments, there's a certain sequence that the Ten Commandments follow. It starts with a very overarching kind of law, which seems more moral, and then it ends with a law. The 10th of the Ten Commandments is the sin of covetousness. Thou shalt not covet your neighbor's oxen. And so that you see
focus on the sin.
There's a sort of granularity which
increases. But I want to focus on one.
Yeah.
I want to focus on one, and that's taking the Lord's name in vain. Is that a sin?
Yes.
Okay. And does it have anything to do with other human beings? Would it be a sin? I mean, could Socrates sin by taking the Lord's name in vain? Could a Chinese person take the Lord's name in vain by worshiping false gods? Worshiping false gods, is that a sin?
I don't think that they really could, because they don't have the Mosaic law to tell them not to. They don't have this encounter. They didn't have to go 40 years in the desert prior to finding Israel, so they didn't have this ancestral tradition which had wedded the legal to the moral.
If we didn't have the Mosaic law, it wouldn't be a sin.
What's that?
If we didn't have Mosaic law, it wouldn't be a sin. The Chinese can't sin against the Ten Commandments.
There wouldn't be a God in the same sense, because the thing that's unique about Moses is he's both a lawgiver and a prophet who has a direct encounter with the divine. And the laws that he hands down to the Jews are laws which are received from Yahweh. And so even the word Yahweh, Jews, even in emails and stuff, will put ellipses,
right.
To not say that particular formulation of syllables.
Right.
Because their God is to be Jewish is such an interesting thing, because Judaism is not based in what you think, on your belief system. If you're a Jew, if your mother is Jewish. And so it has this, Judaism is best conceived as its own civilization. It's not quite an ethnicity. It's not quite a religion. The Judaism people, right? As a whole is actually its own civilization. It's a small civilization in comparison to Rome and the days of Christ, but nevertheless, it is its own civilization going up against a larger one.
Sin is tied to a particular culture. It's not something that applies to. So the Chinese can't sin under Mosaic law because they don't.
Look at St. Paul when he says that that when the heathen does what is right, it is shown that the law is written in his own heart. So in a sense, yes, in a sense, no.
So if they get it right, then they're anticipating, but if they get it wrong, they sin.
Well, you can't. A sin requires knowledge that a sin is being committed. So if I don't have if I don't have an understanding that something is wrong, then when I do it, I'm not culpable.
So the only way you can have an understanding of what is wrong is by having the Mosaic law taught to you.
Not necessarily.
It doesn't. God hasn't legislated to human beings as a whole. God has legislated through his chosen people, and if you don't happen to have received the word, then you can't sin. Is that what you're suggesting?
Yes, to some extent, yes. I mean, but to some extent, no. It just depends. Like, if you know that something is wrong and you do it anyway, that is a sin regardless of where you are from.
Well, but it's doing what's wrong.
That's just a natural. That's kind of a natural feel. Like, if you think of like a child who is raised by pickpockets, is theft in that case as big a sin as someone who is an adult who has been raised right, who knows that theft is wrong and thieves anyway. The theft in one case is more permissible morally. It might still be cause the same damage to the one stolen from.
It's culturally dependent because
But-
Plato and Socrates are looking for something that's not dependent on the way you're brought up. That's not culturally dependent. He's looking for natural right. That is something that applies to everyone. This is what's right, whether people understand it
Yes.
or not. And they may not be held accountable in the same way that you're talking, but you couldn't call it sin. I don't see how sin applies.
Error, an error is only an error in any context because there is knowledge that an error is being made, and that it would be better, that it would be more towards the good to not perform the error, whatever that may be.
Socrates does that too. I think, there's a distinction between lying and making a mistake. And as Socrates points out, the person who lies knows the truth. The person who makes the error doesn't know the truth. A liar is closer to knowledge than the person who makes the error. Do you accept that?
Wait, that the liar is closer to the truth? How so?
Knows the truth. You can't lie unless you know the truth.
Yes. So, I mean, Marco's latest article talks a lot about betrayal, that there's a reason why Dante places traitors in the furthest reaches of hell.
Yeah.
And it's because the traitor, Judas Iscariot, is someone who would have cast out demons, who would have performed miracles as part of the elect set of apostles. And so for someone like Judas to betray Christ, it'd be much different than some, Roman soldier to betray Christ.
George Costanza gets it too. It's not lying if you believe it.
That's how you pass the detector test. Yeah.
No, Dan. Larry David got it.
Oh yeah, okay. He's the storyteller. That's right.
Right. Whenever you tell a lie, even a white lie, you are betraying the higher truth. You're not staying. Yeah, I don't know.
But I'm still curious because this is I think crucial when it gets to the difference between Christianity and Plato. And you're suggesting it sounds to me, and I think you've said this, that in some ways it's dependent on what you're taught, that the sins for not following the 10 commandments are dependent upon you knowing the 10 commandments, living in a tradition that accepts the 10 commandments and lives under them.
In which taking the Lord's name in vain even makes sense as a category, as a concept. Because if you went back in time to Athens and said to Socrates, what do you think about taking the Lord's name in vain? He would probably just scratch his head and say, what do you mean?
Okay. I think you're right. So let me ask you this. Do you think... Hang on just a second. By the same
aren't we separating these two? This discourse has been separating systematically the two poles. So on the one hand, we have natural right, and then on the other hand, we have biblical revelation. And it is not at all clear to me that if you look at the story of Adam and Eve, not to speak of everything else, we have that separation that is clear cut. In other words, if you were to show the Decalogue to Socrates, would it make sense to him or not? And yes, would he scratch his head, or would he say, "Well, let's look at this," and he would say, "You know what? It does make sense." Just as he says that some things about Athenian laws make sense. He didn't make those laws, but he sees something at the heart of those laws that is divine. Do we not acknowledge that? That there is something in the Athenian laws that he recognizes as divine. Well,
forget for a moment Socrates or Plato and just say a random person in that cultural context. You take just by lottery, you pick a random person from ancient Athens and you say to them, because not everyone is as inquisitive. Because if you show someone like Socrates or someone like Plato,
not just the inquisitive. It's not just skeptical in the zetetic sense. It is a question of being not being beclouded, by the societal expectations and demands. So it just happens to be that most Christians will agree with the Decalogue in a nominal sense, but then in a practical, concrete manner, if you ask them what this means, they will look at you with, without knowing what to say. So nominally, the Christian will recognize the crime. In practical terms, not that clear at all. In the absence of an established, biblical law, the Athenian will look at you in a perplexed manner, perhaps, unless he is Socrates or a Socratic, in which case he will see natural law natural right vindicated in and by divine biblical revelation. This is what I'm suggesting.
I agree totally.
So, but Dan will have something to say about this. I don't know. But this whole, to get back to the formulations of the article, what we have here is biblical revelation vindicating natural right. And I think that this is the whole point of Strauss's reference to Platonism being overly successful at times, where the vindication is taken as a proof, as the consummation of natural right. So now you no longer need to live out natural right, because the problem of natural right, and thus the problem of Socrates, has been resolved once and for all by the divine biblical revelation.
Right.
This, I think, is
but it
what
hasn't been for the reasons that I think Chris points out. I mean, he focuses on the cultural aspect, not biblical revelation. That whether or not the revelation is received and in the right spirit depends on the tradition in which you're brought up, and that a Chinese person is not subject to the biblical revelation, is not in error, does not sin, because he hasn't received that tradition.
not entirely, and not the same way, but
hang on just a quick second. Let me just,
yes.
There was one other point that I wanted to get to, and I wondered, Chris, if you also think that Socrates then is also determined by the Athenian cultural tradition. That is, that the Socratic search for natural right is dependent on the tradition in which he grew up, or is he after something that transcends what he received in his Athenian upbringing?
I think he definitely transcends. I mean, his execution, his trial and execution, I think are the proof of the fact that he was seeking something beyond mere legalism. That apart from the Mosaic law, one never gets a legal system which is generated by direct divine intervention. That it's only Moses who receives the Decalogue on Mount Sinai. There are no other examples of a legal system, be it Athenian, be it Chinese, be it whatever, that has a divine source. And so,
Muhammad.
Well, that Muhammad is a special case, because there's a claim in Islam that law is dictated. So there's a kind of quasi-Christian element to Islam, and Islam, yes. So I mean, if you believe that, if you are a Muslim, then that would be on par. That Muhammad is a greiter prophet than either Moses or Jesus.
Excuse me, Chris. Why do you? I don't understand on what grounds some of the claims are based. I mean, if you look at ancient China, you clearly have these kings who give out the laws, who are by definition the sons of heaven, and they're responding to a heavenly mandate. And
sure.
The laws have thereby a divine source.
Or look
There's
at
no
Rome
question about that.
Look at Caligula.
And you can go elsewhere too to find this.
Yeah, look at Caligula. making himself a deity in the Roman pantheon. I mean, yes, there are claims. There are claims in Islam. There are claims in the Roman pantheon. There are claims made to divinity, and in fact, I think it's pretty much.
And there are claims among the Jews.
And yes, exactly. So what makes the Jewish claims unique is if anything, that one finds them more credible, and that you find the other ones to be fallacious. That
How so? And what?
Is Moses on par with Caligula? You know, I mean, or does Caligula's mode of life does Caligula show the falsehood of his own claims to divine transcendence by the fact that he, you know, is always dressing up as a woman and lopping off people's heads? You know, that by their fruits you shall know them, it says in the Gospels. And so, you know, yes, there are stories, there are mythologies surrounding the divinity of Chinese and Roman lawgivers, but are those stories true? Or
how do you judge between them? I think this is a great, this is exactly getting, I think, down to brass tacks here. And this is Socrates' question, and it doesn't seem to be the point for Christianity, which itself offers an answer to the question, what is natural right? That you don't really even need to raise the question, what is natural right, because you've got the divine law. But the Socratic question is meant to address the fact that you've got these different claimants, and Caligula, you know, I think is one that you suggest because you don't find it credible. And that from a moral standpoint, that somehow morality is the basis for a human being to judge these things, which is exactly, I think, the approach that Socrates takes. He takes justice very seriously and wants to know what is justice, what is natural right, and that is not dependent on this cultural tradition. And
but at the same time, it is not separated. It is not separate from the question of law. As Xenophon, as will be said, you know, there was at some point the claim that for Socrates will go as far as to identify right or justice with law. The legal question has not been severed from the moral question of justice or right, and vice versa. The two are, for the most part, overlapping, and clearly there is a dialectic, if you like, but never are the two terms separate. Thus, the question of natural right seeks a vindication.
But they are separate.
It seeks its answer at the heart of law.
But can there be unjust laws?
About clearly for everyone.
Okay.
Clearly for everyone.
So then they are separate.
But the question is, where do you seek justice? Do you seek it beyond the law, or do you seek it at the heart of law? In other words, does the legal corrupt system of Rome, imperfect legal system, presuppose a divine, let us say divine, in scare quotes almost, but to say a mysterious, transcendent source that justifies it in the face of barbarism, outright barbarism, so that we have the question of Caesarism revived. So Caesar, Caesar, the king, is, with his iron fist, is ultimately justified insofar as he is intervening, Deus ex machina, if you like, he is intervening to avert anarchy, which is the worst form of barbarism, of tyranny. Now, people and the situation will take care of Caesar, and he will be overcome one way or another.
But still, you got this problem, don't you? And I think I follow you, but that anarchism or barbarism are then the threat or the danger which is overcome by law.
Yes.
But they don't determine the specific law, that there are a variety of laws which can meet that challenge. No? Yes.
They don't, you don't need Moses to counter barbarism.
Right.
You can have the Roman tradition, except for one problem. with the rise of the corruption of the Roman Empire, that tradition had been, corrupted to the point where it was perceived that only something like a Mosaic law could save the day. Joachim, we're here for this, perhaps the last segment of our discussion. And really what we've been discussing is the manner in which nature and law are articulated. How do these two poles relate to each other? Yeah, and there are inadequacies in law, whence the abstractions of the philosophers, the early philosophers seeking justice that transcends a right that transcends law. Today we would say positive right, law.
But also sustains law.
Not necessarily in some cases. So with his pre-Socratics, for the essentially.
Yeah, exactly. That's why I was the distinction between Socratics and pre-Socratics.
Yes, that is important.
Does this transcendence sustain law or not? That's where I wanted to take that.
Yes, yes. So is it providential? Is it finally, for the pre-Socratics, it is to be understood in terms of the material order, a mysterious order that is incommensurate with the lessons of the fathers.
Yeah.
Let's see. We have Paul.
Do you find an Adam cut?
So Paul, I was just saying with Joachim that people sought an answer to the limitations of law. What lies beyond the law? Is there a moral order? Look at the Stoics that sought a cosmic moral order beyond the law, and yet somewhat echoing the language of the laws, clearly. Now, with Socratism, we have a turn back to the laws, right? So we have Xenophon suggesting that Socrates went as far as suggesting that there is a coincidence, a coincidencia, that the two overlap, that justice and law are overlapping. He sought, to echo other interpreters, justice at the heart of law, as the forgotten, as the eclipsed, the buried heart of law, a heart that is buried in our own nature. Christianity, in the earlier segments of our conversation here, vindicates, this was the argument of the article Beyond Philosophy and the Beyond, vindicates that Socratic appeal to natural right, an appeal that is an expression, a direct expression, in fact, of natural right. He lives out the natural, what we call the natural right. And where does he live it? He lives it out at the very heart of the law. And so you see that all of his discourses, all of his terms echo the language of the laws of Athens. And yet he transcends them by somehow opening the window, opening the door to the, what we would call the divine, forgotten source and, you could say, abysmal foundation of those laws. There are Christians who assume that, or people who consider themselves Christians who assume that the Christian revelation has completed, has consummated the philosophical Socratic seeking, the search for that, and the opening up and the of laws after those foundations. that now philosophy is done. We learn the opinions of philosophers, but some of the arguments, the logic will help us defend the law, the new law, which is a very strange law. This law that is at the same time a logos, as if you have a resolution of the Socratic life in any case. And then what the article is arguing for is a Christianity that does not consummate philosophy and resolves the problem of Socrates, the problem of therefore living out that natural right, which is buried somehow at the heart of laws, and at the same time within human nature, but to draw us back to it, to vindicate, to tell us that that Socratic life is the just life. It is the life that is proper to the human being as such in this world. So we have these two problems, and our friends Dan and Chris, but I think Joachim will correct me if he thinks otherwise, but I think that Dan in particular was stressing that there is kind of separation, in fact, of natural right, okay, and so Socrates was defending natural right, and now we have divine law. So we don't have that divine law among the Athenians, and we have a spurious one. Hence Socrates' apparent lack of, I add apparent, lack of concern with the problem of what we call sin. I was insisting, however, that sin is a translation of culpa, and culpa, even in medieval Christianity, is tied to a legal problem. Okay, it is inseparable from the problem of law. Go ahead.
What I wanted to butt in actually there, make a little wedge in there all along, because it was kind of confused, because it seemed like Chris was teeing up with an etymological dive into the hamartia, which would not have resulted in where the discussion went there, where there is this insistence on knowledge as a kind of moral qualifier for whether or not something is sinful. And then that led to, okay, so who has this knowledge? And then that led to a variety in legal codes, and then that would lead us to look at one specific divine revelation versus maybe a natural law beyond all of those other legal codes. That sort of roughly was my reading of that conversation, and I thought that it was odd the way that went. It's too bad the two gentlemen aren't here to respond.
The suggestion was that Paul, that if I understand this, the general gist of their argument correctly, that really take the commandment of the Decalogue, not naming God, the name of God in vain, that in the absence of the Mosaic laws, pagans would not know of them, and therefore they could not sin with respect to them.
That's what I wanted to ask was, but look at these societies, and I mean, as it were, look into the records of the court cases. Was no one ever being accused of blasphemy? I would say yes.
Sure.
Against and so I found that I didn't quite agree. I didn't quite agree with that, with so sharp a distinction that would lead us to
Sure.
Well, to where the argument ended up, which is with a distinction between a revelation and natural right. I think that's where that's the hinge where that distinction rests on. You think?
Yes, yes. I mean, clearly there is. Now you could argue that that you don't have Mosaic law as such, and so such a what we usually call as monotheism, biblical monotheism, has not been professed among other peoples. On the other hand, we have the old recognition that all what we call polytheism presupposes a monotheistic principle. So we could say that, okay, even among the Romans, ultimately all the gods had a father, and it was acknowledged that Zeus was the father of all the gods, and that ultimately he was the ultimate god. Cleanthes and others, he was the supreme ruler of the universe, the creator of all things, and we have it among the pagans.
Who is the supreme ruler?
Zeus.
Jove.
Deus.
Yeah.
Zeus, whence Deus.
Yes. Well, of course, that's not the case in the theogony. There, Zeus has a father who's kind of a monster, and the monster has a father who's
Yes, but this is where others have argued that this was not the original discourse. That the original discourse is somehow buried within that polytheistic discourse. That is implicit, hidden in it.
That I agree with.
Is a monotheistic.
It could be inferred. It might not have always been understood that way.
Yeah, not only inferred but deduced.
Yeah.
Deduced.
Yeah.
So that there is something. But now the question, however, was in the past to what extent that deduction should take the shape of a consummation of polytheism. To what extent that insight into the unity of the divine should eclipse the multifaceted.
Had a question about that too, but that's going way back to the beginning of the conversation. I don't know if Paul has anything to say first.
No. Go ahead.
Okay, because that was actually one of my questions vis-a-vis the article that we might have started with. Or during the first half of the call, because going back to that little paragraph that Dan read to you, Marco, I don't know if you recall it, about the Socratic problem. I can't quote it to you exactly, but it's something like Christianity has a certain claim of proving the Socratic, the justice of the Socratic life, or the truth of the Socratic life. But that modernity in criticizing Christianity can also claim to do away with that proof, and that proof is therefore on kind of an alien ground to the Socratic life. Otherwise, you could do away with one and not the other. So that suggested to me that the Christian claim to not the vindication, as you put it, but the proof, as in the article of the Socratic life, it rests on something that it doesn't share with Plato. And we've taken a stab at figuring out what that might be, although the formulation of that question was different. But it's basically this. But I don't think we got there yet. So that's a good reason for me to ask again. What is this this proof, or this supposed proof, and what is it about it that it doesn't share with Plato?
But the article is arguing that when ill understood, Christianity is proving once and for all the legitimacy of the Socratic life. It is proving that that divine revelation is there conceived as the solution to the problem of natural right. So we have a law that is fulfilling all previous laws, but also the need for philosophy.
Yeah, for investigation. So that would consist in the divinity of the law, the direct reception.
So even well, that would be the coincidencia, and ultimately that is a conception that feeds right into Hegel, but which again I argue to be a wrong conception of Christianity.
Okay, so
the consummation of law does not presupposes the consummation of philosophy. Even with the most beautiful and perfect of laws, you still need philosophy. Even if it's God himself who is revealing himself, and so that you have man who is law, the logos is the nomos, you still, that does not suggest or indicate or tell us that philosophy has been superseded. In fact, it tells us the opposite. It simply vindicates philosophy as the proper path of life for the human being.
Okay, so what's missing and never even intimated in Plato is a law beyond thought, or without thought. A law without thought.
No, there's no such thing. I mean, a law without legislator, that would be what, the laws of modern science.
No, but I mean a law that doesn't require of us to inquire into it. That's
but that law that does not require that we think, that we interpret, which is, one could argue, the Islamic law. We can argue about the details, but we cannot argue about the nature of that divinity. That is a law that is very close to the mechanical laws of modern science.
Yes, that led to some outrage during the kitchen table debates. I can tell you, among the moderns, among the company. that was very amusing.
Paul, how are things?
Okay. I'm not perfectly sure what you're getting at, but it seems to me that it seems to me to open up our other discussion about what Leo Strauss is ultimately saying. But I'm not really sure exactly where you're going with this. But it seems like a certain amalgamation of religion and philosophy. In other words, that there's this. I'm not sure I understand, but that there's a harmony where they're working together in a certain way. I'm maybe I didn't understand, but it sounded like you're saying that that the ultimate Christian life is the Socratic life, or something like that.
No, yes and no, but not that Christianity is consummating the Socratic life. It's precisely the opposite of what I would say, but that it's vindicating it. That when properly understood, Christianity is inviting us to recognize the Socratic life as the proper life for the human being, the life that we should strive to live. Now, and for those who don't, the life that we should revere, and the life that we could revere also as saintly. Okay, and so vouched for directly by the Christian divinity.
And that correctly understood Christianity would not be medieval Christianity. It would be a Christianity that looks back to its origins.
No, I am actually saying that when properly understood, medieval Christianity is saying precisely that.
But that there's also a misunderstanding that I gathered from one of your writings that that medieval Christian or Catholicism can misunderstand itself, and
there are, as I was pointing out in the other segments, that there are undercurrents to medieval Christianity, so that we could call it a nominalist impulse, okay, that stretches back to, you could say, pre-Socratism, okay, antinomianism and so forth, that is ultimately parasitic on a Platonic or Socratic impulse. On the former, the parasitic one, as I would call it, Christianity has settled the matter of Socrates, and ultimately it bespeaks a law without mystery, so that ultimately this strand of this take, on Christianity, the strand of, you could say, interpretation, will lead at some point to the rise of modernity and its notion that the human universe is grounded in mechanisms. Okay, so there's no consciousness, there's no thought that is fundamental, and that our ordinary deficiencies can connect to, as it were, can return to. The truth of the law is a mechanism. So there's almost a legalization of human life. If you understand what I mean, okay. And so that this take on medieval Christianity would not be the proper take.
And that would be exemplified in its crude outer forms as, for instance, selling indulgences.
Yeah, well, yes. I mean, wherever you have, you can also have a Socratic interpretation of that. But of course, the mercification of life, is part and parcel of this current.
All right. So, but Marco, what is the Socratic life that is admired by correctly understood Christianity?
In the previous segments, I was referring to Socrates as standing for a right that is above all might, be it a cosmic might or the might of a king. That is clearly upheld by medieval Christianity, by early Christianity. Of course, the very account of the Jesus on the cross, the biblical references to the otherworldly, the beyond, however that is conceived, where the victim in this world is, well, finds his salvation, finds his vindication. All of this is compatible with the Socratic life, the Socratic lesson.
Isn't the biblical idea that right, I mean, right as humans understand it, is nothing compared to the mysterious might of the Lord?
No, I mean that is a vulgar notion that is bound to the conception of divinity as will. The might alone is never separate from the will, and the will is not separate from the thought.
Well, will, but what about creation?
Yeah, what about it?
Well, God creates light and sees that it's good.
Good, yeah.
Well, good, not to him, good in the absolute, but that's something that is beyond possible human comprehension, except insofar as it, I mean, so we can see, light can be bad for us given the conditions. We're trying to sneak by and a light turns on and the enemy shoots us, or in other words, there's our perspective is keeps us from understanding the
things in themselves.
Well, yeah, the divine order. What we are, God is omnipotent and omniscient, and that's something that we can't understand. I mean, we can try to imagine it, but it's not part of what we can do or what we can understand. We can understand that we can't understand it.
This is the problem of seeing things from somewhere and seeing things as things see themselves, or of seeing the interiority of things, or seeing the thing itself, in fact. And this is the Socratic problem. Socratic problem, the philosophical problem that was also lived out by Aristotle when he noted that the human being as such, pantes anthropoi, he says all human beings are somewhat defined by this desire, this natural desire, to see things behind their mask, the eidos of things, the hidden form of things. And that means to come into communion with the inner forms of things, which is to say, at once, to be with God, because God, nous, this mind, wins the things, that is at work within things, sees the perfection of things, that is to say, their proper eidos. He sees the end of things, the telos, and he is that telos, because ultimately things try to get back to that God. So really what Aristotle is saying there is that all men by nature, I mean, man, the human being as such, desires to be God. and the homoiosis of the Platonists, human being striving to be like God, is right down the alley there. Now, in that article on the Beyond, I suggested that biblical revelation does not settle that striving. It is a revelation that is there precisely for that striving, and that it is vindicating it, that is telling everybody who does not strive thus to, number one, respect, admire, honor that striving, and to conceive it as the proper way of life. The proper way of life being the one that was referred to in that opening passage of the Metaphysics of Aristotle as the striving to be like God. And it's a striving that presupposes a calling. So it is somehow presupposing, therefore, a being found. We are called and we are responding. Now, this question of being called and responding is a question that I address at some length in one of the articles that is to appear in the press with Dante, because in Dante's comedy you have this problem that is the fundamental problem of the comedy. From the beginning, from the first canto of Inferno to the last canto of Paradiso. I don't know if I've already sent you a preview of that. The question of, I think I sent you a copy of that, where you have the desire of the poet that is catapulted into divine love. And this love shows that there is a fundamental harmony between what the poet wants and what God wants. And that harmony is represented by the velle. The Latin term is velle, the will. And once you have this established harmony between what the poet wants and what God wants, what the divine wants, a harmony that is established by divine love, into which the poet's desire has been projected providentially, then everybody's will is to bow to the poet's will, is to acknowledge, okay, we have to acknowledge that what we non-poets, what we violent barbarians want is inconsequential. God is not there to vouch for our will, to do our will. He's there to vouch for the poet's life. He is there to consecrate the poet's will. So the poet now is receiving an adequate defense. God himself is defending the poet as understood by Dante. Okay? So that would be the proper function of Christianity.
So Marco, is that what you mean by what Christianity is to do more than paganism?
Clearly.
Is that meaning giving itself to poetry? Is that what you mean by that?
Say that again.
Is that meaning giving itself to poetry? Is that what that
giving? What gives itself to poetry?
Meaning. That's how you put it in this article we're discussing.
The meaning is met by the poet. That poetry is the way to the meaning.
I think that's really how you put it. That meaning gives itself.
But in what context? Yes, meaning gives itself to the poet. Yes.
Yeah.
But but then given what I just said, So that the poet is the one who seeks meaning
Yeah.
in that way. Doesn't seek it, as we say today, individually, as somebody who is there asserting is in a barbaric way, in an unpoetic way. He seeks it poetically.
Mm-hmm.
So,
But that reminds me of Greek religion,
yes,
where
elaborate.
where the myths were elaborated by the poets and became generalized and popular through the theatrical competitions and so on. And so the you could say the religious innovations, the stories that are told by the poets,
Yes.
which include the acts of the gods and how they're seen in different ways by the different poets. The theater being, particularly in Athens, it's the theater. It's for Dionysus. It's for the god. If your addressee, as per Joachim's question, is the poet or the artist, who is that poet or artist? And I'm just wondering if, for instance, I would be the addressee.
Asking for a friend.
Who is to be converted?
Well, you were talking about awakening the poet to their proper mission.
Yes.
So eventually, you're talking about actual persons.
Yes. Yes. But, if you read it and take it seriously, these pieces are opening up a window, an alternative.
All right. Well, let's get down to brass tacks. What am I doing wrong?
You're not paying your brass tax.
As in what function?
Well, I'm struggling to be a painter.
Okay. Recently, I was invited, and I took my son. I couldn't take my daughter for disgraceful reasons. I could to a small concert.
To what?
A small concert, violin and clarinet, in a art gallery, downtown in Naples, and the idea there was that this is abstract stuff by a few ladies, 3 ladies. Anyway, the idea was that you admire beautiful paintings and
listen to beautiful music.
The music was fine. The music was fine. It was good. I think a good performance.
Of what?
Well, they mixed a few pieces, and they even gave some Tchaikovsky with a country twist.
But it was older music. It wasn't new music.
No, it was old. It was old with some twists, and it was a good performance. My son Leon enjoyed it. He also enjoyed the snacks at the end, the cold cuts. But we talked about the paintings, what they meant, but what I've been telling a few people there is that as long as we don't establish an intimate collaboration between painters, musicians, and poets, we're all stuck, in the best of cases, as prostitutes in the hands of merchants. So we let the entertainment business rule. And none of our responses will be effective.
Well, yeah, except that I don't really sell either my paintings or my music.
Not a question of selling, of course, but to again, the end of these disciplines, the proper end, is one of guidance. So, and I said, if whether either the painter is a guide, or he's nothing. He's not entertaining you. He's not pleasing you. He's not there to please you. He's there to guide you. Either music is there to guide you, or it's nothing. Either poetry is there to guide you, or it's nothing. It's not, again, there to respond to vulgar or non-poetic expectations.
Well, this corresponds to my idea of evil art.
Yes, well, that's where we are at. How do you respond to evil? And I argue what I think is commonsensical, that the three poles of interpretation, poetic discourse, logos, okay, as poetry, as discourse, painting as shaping the stage for discourse. I've spoken about this elsewhere. Music as converting the dregs of life, of human life, the noise, into within the painting, so that it calls all of that which discourse necessarily leaves out back within the painting, within the stage that has
Marco, this is
created by the painter. But the collaboration of these three is the only way that you can have a solid response to the current onslaught, which leads straight to Sodom and Gomorrah.
Well, the collaborators, like, for instance, in opera.
It was on my tongue this whole time.
I don't mean that you need a synthesis, but you can have, well, that would be theater, right? I don't mean that. I don't mean that then you have an integration of painting, but
okay, but I mean, opera would be then an example.
Not necessarily.
So what do you mean by cooperation?
In opera, painting is generally a kind of decoration for.
All right, but so what is your cooperation?
Where
Marco, because you're saying that this cooperation is a necessary aspect.
Yes. No.
That's what I'm wondering.
The only way you can respond, these three poles, the painter, the musician, the poet, the rhetorician, he's responding effectively, and concretely effectively, to the demonic machinery that is in place, the entertainment business, the manipulation.
In other words, what you're saying is that they should all be going in the good direction.
Yes, with the understanding of their proper function.
All right.
Yeah.
All right. Well, look.
Specific their eidos. The eidos of each is to be recognized, and in this respect, they can function vis-a-vis the society, as it were. They can function properly.
Has that happened before?
What?
Has that happened before?
Yes, in the 16th century.
Oh yeah.
All right.
Now, okay, well then that answers that can help answer the question, right?
Well, the thing is, we're all artists here, And I appreciate this theoretical talk, but eventually we have to get specific.
Yes.
Yeah, so I want to know what I'm not doing right as a musician, what I'm not doing right as a painter, and what Joachim is not doing right as
I think that's more obvious. I think that's more obvious.
Well, no, but being weak because you're building yourself up is one thing. Going in the wrong direction is something else. I mean, you can be at the beginning of a path or far along the path, and it can be the wrong path.
Sure.
You could begin a path, and if it's the right path, you're not far along it, but it's the right path.
Yeah.
Yes.
Speaking on that order also. Let's hear the answer.
I have tried to shed light on the proper telos of painting, the proper telos of poetry. I think I have a poetic telos article out already, or soon to be out there. Maybe that was on. I think it was already out on the Dogma.
On Lucien's.
Yeah, on the Revue journal. But the telos of poetry or something like that. And I have already addressed the question of the telos of painting. I have not written specifically articles, I think, focusing on music, but I have referred to them on. I referred to the telos of
Marco, as far as I'm concerned, we never finished our conversations about painting.
Yeah.
And as I've mentioned several times, I feel very sympathetic towards.
If possible, I will work further on exemplifying what.
Right. I feel very sympathetic towards what you say, but when eventually it has to become concrete, and it seems to me that what I understood of what you're explaining about painting is not something that is going to translate into. I don't see how it's going to translate into something concrete.
Look, I mean, we have such great examples of heroic painting that I have humbly referred to what we have already without focusing on bits and pieces of work that I have, on work that, there's just so much that a human being in the flesh can do. And my family situation has taken a lot from me. But
sure,
I'll be working in that direction to further exemplify what I'm referring to. The incarnations are found there in the 15th. We have heroic 16th, 17th.
Yeah, right. This is something that's always bothered me about.
We have to go back to that.
Yeah, okay. Except that the question is, how do you do that? And what does that mean exactly? Because nothing's ever going to be exactly what it.
No. I have tried to bring out the heroic character. I've tried to bring out the heroic character. It is a matter of a kind of awakening to that heroic character.
Or in my view, when it comes to painting, it's one thing to admire the past, which I certainly do, but the past glories of painting can't be recaptured in any way, I don't think, through simple admiration of the thing. I mean, eventually it becomes, in a certain way, it becomes a question. It becomes a technical question in a certain way, because these are arts, and the art is something that has to be mastered, and then the mastery of that art then has to be used in a good direction and not in an evil direction. But it can be used in an evil direction, because it's just a technique.
Yes. Well, no, yeah, but what I am suggesting here is that at our stage, given the stage of corruption of our civilization and of our upbringing, we cannot simply start from technique. We have to start from a discourse that frees us from our prejudices.
Well, I would agree with you, but I think those are two different problems that are not.
For me, they're essential. You can't go back to technique if you don't free yourself from the prejudice. Otherwise, you end up you're lost. You're not going.
Well, right. Except
you could do an AI painting of Botticelli.
What?
You could do an AI painting of Botticelli too. With it. Doesn't mean you've understood a Bellic thing.
Well, they do this Dante poetry and
the fake Rembrandts, which are just, but what they're just averaging out these digital
algorithms
expressions of so it doesn't mean anything. It's just more, at best, it's more of the same thing, and in an averaged out form at best.
Right. Now, the point here is not to create new special effects. The point here is to guide. So the guiding presupposes that there's a discourse that has opened up, and has shaped the character of the painter. Look at Michelangelo. Look at Botticelli, whom I've called a heroic painter. But look at these great painters. They have been educated. They have been educated through, clearly, discourse. Now, this discourse was not the insane one we are brought up with today. It was a discourse that enabled them to be great painters.
Well,
it just didn't come out of nowhere. It wasn't a tradition of technique. It wasn't.
But
technique was, came out.
No, Marco, of course not. But for instance, this is something I've insisted upon. If people can't get their minds out of a relativistic way of thinking, they can't do anything at all.
Right.
So, but that in itself is a problem, that it's its own thing. I mean, other things depend on it, but it's not essentially related to problems of painting, either technical or moral. It's a basic piece that has to be put into place that doesn't have anything to do with drawing. It has nothing to do with drawing something beautifully. It's something that you have to put into place in order to make it possible to move in directions like that, because otherwise you can't even see that thing clearly, because everything's okay. And you're getting rewarded for doing this stuff that's evil. You can't even see that it's evil. You can't see the evil because you're convinced by this relativistic point of view. So that's something that has to be taken care of. That's something that's specific to our situation. Getting rid of relativism, and then
where's the importance of a proper discourse?
Well, right, but before you can even talk about a proper discourse, your mind has to be prepared to receive it, and a mind that is founded itself on relativism can't receive anything.
I know, but you're countering. Yes, but this is precisely the point. You're countering the corrupt, diabolical discourse with a good discourse. However,
except that's not going to work, because people who are convinced of relativism, the so-called evil discourse is equivalent to the good discourse. And we see that all around us. There's so many examples of it today that there's no point in even pointing them out. So in other words, something has to happen in our particular situation, our very peculiar situation. It's historically unprecedented to the extent that it's happening. I mean, it's happened in little ways.
It's happened thanks to the development of technology that has made it possible.
Well, it's even happened in the past, but it's now happening on a scale and to a degree that's unprecedented, and technology is part of it. But it's not only technology.
I'm saying that it could not have happened without technology.
No,
Technology
right, absolutely.
was the Trojan horse that has allowed this to happen.
Sure, it's a crucial aspect. But so then the question becomes, how do you get out of it? And you can't get out of it by simply saying to someone, here's something good, because that discourse is unhearable in the current situation.
That is correct. That is correct. And that is why these articles that I'm writing are not primarily for zombies. Okay, there's been a massive mass-scale zombification of population.
Absolutely.
So
and
they're completely oblivious to what is going on. They tell you, well, I do this even though I don't see why, but I'm doing it anyway. Okay, right. I'm not bothering asking because I'm afraid, whatever. So no, these articles are addressing painters, musicians, poets, showing that it is not enough for them to pursue their careers, their disciplines, in a vacuum. In other words, independently of the other two poles. The three poles, each one has to understand itself in the light of the others. I don't mean that you have a theater that synthesizes all of them. That's the technocratic.
Well, what does it mean? It's
entertainment business.
It's a sincere question. What does it mean in practical terms?
Well, in practical terms, the painter and the musician have to heed good discourse. You cannot bring about a good painter without the poet's backbone. He will need to correct his speech. He will need to correct all of his prejudices through a good discourse.
Well, this is what I call, this is why I denounce evil art.
Yeah,
or
that's part of it. That's part of it.
It's something very close to what you're saying.
Yeah, that's part of it. That's part of it. That can be an element of that.
Because if there's evil art, then there's something that isn't evil art.
Yeah.
In other words, there are possibilities in art that can be evil.
But the evil art is its own bubble that's feeding on a larger evil.
Well, there's the art. It's like technology. Technology is this terrible problem, but it's in itself, it's this neutral thing. But there's it's the Huber. It's Faustian. It's the
Faustian.
It's Faustian. Faustian. So it's human pride, which seizes a hold of this thing, which gives power, and so it's this being power hungry to be godlike that technology it offers. I mean, everybody's convinced that we've become God because of technology, and that's the problem. The problem is not the technology. The problem is something about our humanity that's a constant struggle. Of course, now the technology has become such a big thing. You know, it's apparently very, very difficult for most people to resist the Faucian bargain.
It's very easy to escape from the struggle. That's for sure. We can entertain ourselves instead.
Well, right, but that comes to the same thing.
And you know, evil art in as much
technology.
Evil art in as much as it isn't a self-contained bubble can feed into that entertainment. That's the market force. That's what it's really directing to.
Well, that's one of the things.
Yeah,
you know,
they're
well, you know, there are the consumers and the producers of this evil situation.
Okay. Look, Paul. I think maybe I'm repeating myself, but what I am suggesting is that there is a discourse that can free both painters and musicians from the place they've been relegated to, the place of whores, within a regime, anti-human, diabolical regime that reduces them to entertainers in Sodom and Gomorrah, more or less relevant. The more, you know, if they want success, they have to be more relevant to the demands of Satan. If they don't want to be very relevant, if they want to be marginalized, then that's their problem.
Well, I don't want to be marginalized, but I am. So
yeah,
I mean,
well, you know, if you don't respond to the demands of Satan, you will be marginalized. But for Satan will look at you and say, and bully you and say, well, it's up to you, Paul. You want to stay there and be marginalized? Then, you know, you don't have to
used to
listen
the taste of walnuts.
You don't listen to my demands.
Get used to the taste of walnuts, Paul.
Yeah.
That's referring to a conversation we had. What he's going to do if he doesn't jump through.
I'm not going to listen to Satan.
So you're going to be marginalized.
Yeah.
However,
I've been marginalized all my life. It's nothing new.
Okay. However,
don't start rapping now.
However, if you know where the painter, where the musician recognize this good, let me be very simple, this good discourse, this pristine discourse, they can contribute to it. Instead of playing whores for the devil, they will turn back, purify themselves, purge themselves of any diabolical residue, and support that discourse for the sake of getting rid of the beast from the cities, as Dante would put it, the she-wolf, who is destroying everything.
Well,
chase her back into that
hell all right.
Just came out of.
But am I doing that?
You know, this can be. There's a lot of work to be done in that direction. You know, what I'm saying is that if you don't have this, you know, falling short of this discourse that
well, am I falling short? Am I falling short?
No, falling short of this guidance of this discourse. The painters and the musicians will not be able to. At best, they can be marginalized. Okay. If they want to come out now, one little man two little men, that's not enough. I am not saying, furthermore, that there's a guarantee that that Sodom and Gomorrah will be corrected. Overall, I don't see this happening. But I mean, you look at and what is more, I mean, presidents are not adequate, because you can go to the end of the Roman Empire, everything was falling apart, and Saint Augustine comes along and he saves the empire. That's very beautiful, and that might have worked to some extent, but
well, it was already over. It was already over.
No.
Well,
No.
sure. He wrote the City of God.
He's just transforming. It's just that the empire is transformed into something else. So the civilization does not end with the formal falling of the cities and so the legal fiber of the country.
Well, right. Except that
it hides
St.
in
Augustine,
monasteries.
Well, certain things continued and other things didn't.
Yeah, it hides in the monasteries, and then it hides until the conditions are proper for its return. So the return of the cities, but we're not in that situation because there has been a universal saturation thanks to technology. Technology has made it possible.
Okay, Marco. I mean,
so there's no guarantee that it's going to work. All I'm saying is that if you want,
there's no guarantee. But I'm just trying to understand. I'm trying to get it, because eventually this is all programs for fixing the thing. I mean, I'm coming from the same place. I mean, my idea is that the only thing that can be done about art, the painting part of it, or the music part of it, is that the painters have to pull themselves together and do proper painting. And
so that's what happen. That's not going to happen unless they are purged first. They're educated by proper.
Look, I'm trying to do this first of all for myself.
That's good.
And so what I want to hear from you is so that I can understand what you were saying in practical terms, is what I'm doing wrong.
As a painter?
Yes. I mean, you have very specific ideas about painting. We've talked about that. These theoretical things. This is something I realized about painting at a certain point, that there's all this talk about certain things like composition. And then, what's then balance and harmony and blah, and all this talk. And I spent years investigating it, and I finally realized that all that talk is 99% irrelevant, and it's really about other things. And you have to get into you can talk about those other things, but it's a whole different discourse that has nothing to do with with the kinds of things that people say, because they just don't know anything about it, and so we're so lost. And so theoretical. I always want to back up anything theoretical that I say with praxis that I've gotten on top of. So I mean, I'm talking about myself, but and how I approach the problem.
Well, they have these videos online, YouTube or elsewhere.
Yeah, tons of them, hundreds, thousands.
Yeah, about the techniques of this master, and they go and unravel the secrets of that brushstroke or that color.
And then nobody can do paintings like that at all, even close.
They can copy some. They can.
Well, they can make copies. They can make copies, but anybody can make a copy. that's making a copy is not a problem, but the things that you really have to know to be able to do something in general like that is not taught at all.
No, yes, precisely. But that is because what is missed is the, well, it's almost a cliche, but it is the spirit of the painting, the spirit of the mind.
There's that. But there's that. But I mean, to me, say when we're talking about composition, it comes down to concrete things that I can talk about. But but composition is one aspect of painting, and it's so again, I appreciate your discourse. I agree with it. I mean, as I mentioned, my way of talking about it is to accuse, to condemn evil art. I mean, I talk about non-art. There's all sorts of so-called art that to me is non-art. I condemn it as non-art. And then there's things which are art in a certain way. They embody certain techniques and so on, but they're evil, and therefore they're bad. Because evil is not good. And so it's something so I don't know.
There are various fronts to tackle that problem. What I've emphasized is not what I would call theory. It is you could say the poetic education of the painter. Now, there is, yes, but to be sure, there is a kind of technical education, but that is no big deal. You need to practice that. That I am speaking for everyone at the same time, not for zombies, but I have not addressed the technique of painting.
Well,
because I have focused on the telos of painting. Now, the technique, you come to my academy. That's my, that's my take on it. You come to my school, and I'll teach you one-on-one. I'm not teaching that over the internet. Come to my school, and I'll teach you what I know while you're working one-on-one. We're working together. I'll, if all goes well, I'll have maybe some video where I show a painting and I explain this painting. Okay, some work of mine, and I'll show how this, try to defend it, to help appreciate certain aspects of it. But then when it comes to learning, following you in your work, what do they do in the 16, 17, 1700s, 1800s, even in some cases?
Yeah.
Well, you go to the bottega, you go to the atelier, and you work. You start cleaning the brushes. Then you go to you draw. Paint these flowers for me in this painting. You draw. You work on details. You go from the details to if I see that you do a good job on the details. Because you've learned by looking at the master, and you say, okay, I give you some tips. Of course, you see how the master works. You
learn by example.
Yeah, you learn by example. Then you move on to okay. Then finally with the Verrocchio, Leonardo had the head of the angel. Okay. Then Caravaggio was trained as he was doing the heads. They say he was doing the heads. Yeah, that's it. That was his job. Then he did some fruit and so forth. Then he moved on and he realized, the whole, he developed organically, appreciating more and more the significance of the whole. Of course, he's been, his teachers highlighted aspects of paintings to him and helped him become aware of aspects of the trade. And then he developed, if he wanted there. He went on his own, and he struggled more and more with these problems, and came to certain results. I would return to that in terms of, what would be a good lesson for painters. That's the only way to do it. That's the only way to do it.
To return to that, you have to start off by having some masters.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So if there's a master, that's a teacher, a good teacher. You go to the good teacher, but the good teacher is going to be, I repeat, a teacher who has been purged of all the garbage, rhetorical garbage of our times, who has the balls to say no to evil.
Then that becomes the question. How do you help people get around? I mean, I struggle with this, because that's what I do on the internet. How to try to urge people to get out of the trap of relativism, and then once their minds are free of that, how can they get pointed in the right direction? It's very hard. I mean, there's people.
Small communities, in all cases, small communities. These articles that I published there, these videos that we have, these conferences, discussions, conversations that we have, they're small in scope and audience. The goal is the establishment of these relations on a small community level. Intimacy is destroyed today, as it was by the early communists. Technocracy destroys intimate relations. It all becomes violence. It becomes vulgarized. It becomes pornography. There's nothing poetic about intimacy. It's been destroyed by and large in the upbringing of people. I don't mean that it doesn't exist, but in the general the massification of the human being. So the only way to have sane painting, sane music, sane discourse, poetry, and for it to flourish is in an intimate setting. And we need to recover the small community. We need to recover the trade, the atelier, low key, the small school, so-called small academic environment. Everything that is small there is to be cultivated and under the radar of the monsters.
Well, that's for sure. If anything's going to happen, it's going to happen that way.
In the Middle Ages, there was monasteries. Today, it's more difficult than in the Middle Ages.
Yeah, right.
Much more difficult. And for this, I reiterate, painters, musicians, poets, guided by the poets, but what kind of poets? Yeah. So I'm talking about a Socratic poet, are to join forces and try to establish such centers of gravitational centers, as it were, to attract youth away from the mermaids of artificial intelligence, as it were,